Hi, everybody. Officially, welcome tonight. My name is Hayla Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am very excited to introduce you to today's reading of new fiction. We'll be hearing from Graham Guest, reading from Henry's Chapel, released by Sagging Meniscus Press on February 1st, 2022. E.V. Padilla, reading from The Lost Princess of Alicante, released August 1st, 2023. And Eric James Fullilove, reading from Overlord, released October 3rd, 2023. All three authors' books can be purchased both from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, the books can be ordered from the publisher websites. I'm going to drop some links in the chat so you can directly check those out. One second here. So at the end of today's event, we're also going to have some time for audience questions. So during the readings, if you have a question for one or more of our authors, you can just type that in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. And then during the actual readings themselves, please stay muted just so we can keep extraneous sound at a minimum. Of course, you are always welcome to use the chat for any praise and comments. Graham plays guitar, he sings, he writes lyrics and music for the band Moses Guest. He has a BA in philosophy from Wesleyan University, an MA in philosophy from Boston College, a JD in law from University of Houston Law Center, an MFA in writing from California College of the Arts, a PhD in English literature, including writing, literature, and theory from University of Glasgow, and that's in Scotland, and a PhD in philosophy from University of Dundee, also in Scotland. I don't think I know anyone with more degrees than Graham. He lives with his family now in Colorado and teaches as adjunct to the philosophy department at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. Tonight, we'll be hearing from Henry's Chapel, which was published by Sagging Meniscus Press in February of 2022. In this novel, we watch a film by proxy through the eyes of a narrator who offers a play-by-play account, complete with probing analysis of a movie that's, included in the actual text. So I've heard, the term metafiction used for this book, and I think it's a really cool just setting and genre to explore. So within this unusual frame, we'll encounter the story of an isolated family in rural East Texas and a tragicomic tale of incest, abuse, mental illness, and liberation. And with that, Graham, take it away. Oh, Graham, it looks like you're still muted.
I promised myself I wouldn't do that, and yet I did it. Yes, thank you for that introduction, Hayla. I really appreciate it. As you said in the introduction, this is Henry's Chapel. It looks like this. It is a a philosophical meta novel. And the kind of all you really need to know is that the narrator is watching a film, and the film is called Lawnmower of a Jealous God. Lawnmower of a Jealous God is a fictional story or film, as it were, and the narrator is watching the film, relaying it to the audience or the reader, and making observations and comments along the way. And that sort of sets the stage. So I will start from the start, from chapter 1, and read a bit, and then I'll skip to a portion inside, and hopefully it won't take too long. So thank you. All right. The screen is dark, but there's a sound like a wind or a great rushing of air or a huge breath. It's a really, really long out breath. It's the massive exhalation of a colossal being, and it goes on and on. All right, it's tapering off now. Now he or she is coming back in with it, inhaling, with intent, it seems, trying to draw a deep, deep breath. It too goes on and on. And finally, it tops out and we pause. Then the out breath begins again, but it immediately ramps up to a super high speed. And the being's lips must be drawn into a tight circle because you can hear it, the pressure, escaping through the hole. And then with an even sharper spike in intensity In a final superplosive thwop, we are spit out with tremendous force into a bright white light tumbling head over heels through the sky, blowing through cumulus clouds. We fly like a humongous preternatural loogie, flipping and rolling and twisting and turning. But now we're slowing down, slowing down, slowing down, and now we're just falling straight down, out of the clouds, down, down, from the illusory blues of heaven to the solid greens and browns of earth below, faster and faster, fade to black. We sit now in darkness and silence. The idea, though, evidently, is that we were present in God's mouth as a gob of spit, which God then expelled. Birthed by expectoration. At first we flew, or more like, on the power of God's breath, we traveled through the air horizontally, briefly, then fell to earth. All of it a pretty spectacular new twist on the old fall of man chestnut, I must say. It's also worth considering that angels have fallen too, and that we, the audience, the viewer, the voyeur, could be cast in the role of fallen angels, or even the devil himself, which would be pretty outrageous. In any case, we must have passed out during the fall and are now slowly regaining consciousness because while the screen is still dark, we can hear a chorus of cicadas buzzing electrically all around, stopping and starting all together as if on cue. This goes on for some time and to some not insignificant effect until finally, against the void, the words, "Lawnmower of a jealous God," appear in red. They hang there for a few seconds, then fade out and are replaced by the words, "Part 1, Family Portrait." Then all of that evaporates, and in its place materializes a big, bright, blue clouded sky, a big blue-backed field of hundreds, thousands of frozen white, bulbous tumors, perfectly evenly spaced across an imperceptible matrix, stretching as far as the eye can see. We must be on the ground, on our backs. We roll over, and before us we see a mother and her two kids standing in the sun in front of a small one-story yellowish brick ranch house. The little girl is holding her mother's right hand, the little boy her left. The two kids are about the same size, and they're about the same age, probably 2.5. Chances are they're twins. They are, all three of them, squinting and smiling severely in that pained, almost demented way into the sun. They move a little bit here and there. They scratch their faces. The kids pull on mother some. They'd rather be doing something else. But for the most part, they stay that way as the title credits appear in one corner and then another. Newton, Boyles, Anchovy. Chad, Eamon, Martin, Blarts. Udo Copenhagen. Gordon, Ram, Dichters. Bice, Karen, Egg. Kendall, Lux, Endebrin. TT, Granulardo. Joss, Christina Hoffman. Johnson, John Pennygravels. Becky Lynn Stubarb. And Lyle Lovett as Lyle. Then in the center of the screen, written and directed by Albarb Noella. Okay, that's the first bit. That introduces the family we're going to be dealing with and the idea that we're watching a film. In the second part, the family's gone on a family trip by car to Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. Elizabeth, I think you might recognize that. And so he is descending. Henry is the main character. They haven't named him yet, I don't think, but Henry's the main character. He is now descending into Carlsbad Cavern, and there's no one else around. So here we go. Henry proceeds in fits and starts. He runs, then sort of skips to a stop, then darts ahead a few steps. Then he stops and looks down the twisted intestinal path toward the black hole below. The words, descent, disintegration, deliverance appear, then fade out. We hear now, or Noella brings to our attention, Noella's the director, of course, the hush of a light breeze pushing up out of the cave. It is impossible to tell whether it is real or a well-executed sound effect, but in either case, it is constant, a sort of perpetual exhalation, and in that, it is the subterranean counterpart to God's massive exhalation at the beginning of the film. Henry darts off again, but now he's just straight running. We take off after him, and very much in the spirit of the Blair Witch Project, our passage is marked by the discombobulating unsteadiness of someone running with a handheld camera. We catch up to Henry just as he reaches the black hole, where Noella has us merge seamlessly with him, so Henry and we are now one. And with this mergence, Noella drops the jarring handheld camera effect for one where it's as if we're riding in a railway or mining car. Yes, we're riding in a mining car now. Our two hands are on the container edge in front of us, traveling at a moderate speed down the tortuous path, silently at first, but then the sounds of the wheels grinding and screeching over the tracks gradually fades in as we begin to take notice on either side of an increasing number of ancient alien formations emerging from the stone in light as we descend, that is less and less from above and more from below, from small, variously placed, variously colored artificial lamps, illuminating here and there a piebald menagerie of twisted needle-toothed beasts and creatures like a giant sickly green anglerfish, a jaundiced laughing Buddha, a towering blue multi-monster faced totem pole, a forest of bursting peni, a gaping orange spike-toothed vagina, a pink clown face gobbed with cauliflower blossoms like cancer all over it, when suddenly the grade and speed of the car dramatically increase, a chorus of ecstatic screams erupts, and we corkscrew down through a tunnel of blurred streaked lights round and round and round and round until finally the lights and tunnel are gone and we are off the rails, just falling and screaming through total darkness, fade to silence. Well, needless to say, with this, the plane of reality on which Henry has existed thus far in the film is pretty much totally forsaken for a figurative and fantastic one. It's a radical material departure for Henry, which alerts us in no uncertain way to, well, not only the central importance of the scene to the interpretation or the interpretations of the film as a whole, but also to the potential instability of Henry's personal experience. I mean, if one minute he can be running down the path into Carlsbad Cavern, and the next be on some kind of thrill ride through a tunnel of terrors, the climax of which has him shooting out into deep space screaming, well, then I don't know what else to conclude, except that he is at least sometimes capable of going completely insane. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. I was really just excited to hear this novel out loud because of the metafiction that you were talking about. And even just that brief reading did not disappoint at all. And of course, I'm sure a lot of people agree with me and need to read more now. But for today, reading next is E.V. Padilla. Elizabeth, born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri, after earning a bachelor's degree in English, headed for New Mexico to teach at a U.S. government school for Native American students, primarily from the Navajo tribe. 2 years later, she followed a calling to a position with the New Mexico Department of Human Services, specializing in children's protective services. Family concerns brought her back to Kansas City after 29 years in New Mexico. While remembering with fondness the culture and cuisine of the American Southwest, she finds contentment back in her hometown, with family and 5 rescued cats competing for her attention. But speaking of the American Southwest, in The Lost Princess of Alicante, we jump between the year 1680 and something like the present day. In 1680, Don Claudio Talavera de Alicante, accompanied by his wife Doña Bernarda, sails to the Caribbean islands and hopes to build an enlightened society, but his descendants discard his ideals. More than 3 centuries later, Inez Zaragoza, who lives with her abusive Aunt Sophia in the American Southwest, struggles to earn her master's degree while working as a cook for a wealthy woman in the town. And we'll see what unfolds now from Elizabeth. Oh, Elizabeth, it looks like you might be muted still. So if you go to if you're scrolling over the Zoom window, you'll see in the bottom left of the screen, there's a button that says unmute.
Oh, I can be unmute now.
All
All
good.
right. One of my 5 rescued cats is asleep to my side. I hope she remains that way because she usually ends up walking across in front of the screen, and I just hope she stays where she is. So, um, all right, this is just narrative here. It's the end of one scene, and then in a couple of minutes we'll we'll take a chapter break and flip to another chapter. So the night wind hooted after her, teasing her hair as she raced past the fountain and down the meandering drive to the road. She could have safely stomped in combat boots along the hallway just now. The occupants of the office, locked together, wouldn't have noticed, hadn't even seen her stealing past the doorway. Outside the gate, she slowed to a brisk walk. At the first bend in the road, she heard a scuffling behind her. She wouldn't stop, of course, wouldn't even look back. What was there to say? She looked back. No one was on the road, only shadows tossing in the wind. Had she really expected to see Alejandro in pursuit, sputtering indignant denials? Ahead, the lights of the plantation house beckoned through the trees. Close now, the gate only a few yards distant. The scuffling behind her on the road resumed, approaching rapidly. It was not Alejandro there on the road. Only a stupid little urchin would have expected him to be there. She broke into a run, opening her mouth to scream out for Herminio. Heavy, muscular arms encircled her. She crumpled to the ground to make dead weight of herself, but the arms coiled around her, lifting her as effortlessly and carried her into the black forest. Silver showering from the moon revealed a flash of chrome on the concealed sedan that had been there earlier. A light snapped on as the rear door opened, giving her a brief glimpse of thick lips and a heavy brow like a shelf overhanging the grotesque face. She hit the seat inside with one shoulder. The bung was the cause of all this, she thought, the cord snapping around her wrists, biting into the skin of her ankles. If not for the bung, she would not be here, shoved into this car, trussed up like wild game. Unbelievable how irresolute she had been. There on the roof with Alejandro. Aunt Sophia was right. She was a shameless hussy. Such were the things she was thinking. The cord knotted, and her lower body capable only of the sort of movement a fish might make on a dry pier. Be still, you won't be harmed. She had heard the line 1,000 times in old movies. Sinister, evil men uttered the words to trembling victims, then dispatched them with an axe in the head or a bullet in the ear. The sedan's engine ground sluggishly, causing a cloud of oily fumes to rise around her face. The old truck at the plantation sent out oily fumes like these. Herminio attributed them to a faulty fuel pump. Herminio, sweet Herminio, always red in the face when he looked at her. With the engine chugging away, the car bounced into the highway. Branches scraped the windows above her head. Why? She asked. An explanation was owed, stupid and facilitating as she had been tonight. Thousands of miles this monster had tracked her, from the little adobe in the North American Southwest to the village of Las Animas on Betania. Be still. Tires hummed on the asphalt, rising in pitch as the sedan picked up speed. Be still, he said. You won't be harmed. Chapter break. Change of scene. Gray light seeped gradually into the cabin, etching serious young faces over the instruments. Through the glass shield, she could see that the rain had stopped. They were drifting into port. Communications passed quietly among the crew in the interval that passed before the vessel shuddered against the quay. Get up, said the man who had guarded her through the night. The name on his uniform read Martinez. He yanked the blanket off her head, pulling her out of the chair. She dropped the paper cups, spilling tepid coffee on the deck. Other crew members looked around at her as she passed behind them. Outside the cabin, wind was light, the sky blushing a soft rose, tinting even the grime-coated windows of the warehouses across from the quay. The odor of oil and machinery succumbed to odors of damp sea air and decay. Like a dying beast, the ship moaned deep in its heart until the engines muttered into silence. Mud boiled up to the surface of water surrounding the bow of the patrol vessel. One by one, crew members descended the ladder, lining up along the quay. All heads turned at the sound of tires shrieking on wet cement. The silver limousine shut out from between two distant warehouses. Crewman Martinez gave a shove. Stumbling down the ladder, Madalena missed the lower rungs, landing on her knees. The limousine speeding towards them screeched to a stop. A tall civilian got out and slammed the door. One by one, crewmen along the line became rigid, raising their hands in salute, trousers flapping in the wind. The civilian moved in swift strides down the quay. He ignored the saluting crewmen, focusing instead on Madalena. Bearing down on her, eyes looking into hers, he hesitated and appeared to catch his breath. No one had to tell her who it was. She knew him well. The acquaintance stretched back as far as she could remember, and Salomon Montemares had never looked so grim. That's it.
All right. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I feel like we're getting the, beginnings of the layout of the story. And of course, we just have to know more, right? So I will be dropping a link in the chat for everyone to check out Elizabeth's book as well. In the meantime, we're going to go to our final reader for today, who is Eric James Fullilove. Eric is an MIT graduate, a CPA, and a published author. He has worked in mainstream media, including CBS, Young and Rubicam Advertising, and Scholastic, the children's book publisher, as well as in various nonprofit organizations dealing with homelessness and HIV, Housing Works, Global Poverty and Displaced Persons, World Vision, Child Development, Boys and Girls Clubs, as well as promoting effective solutions to global poverty problems, innovations for poverty action. He has traveled extensively while working to support global causes in the developing world, having visited over 60 countries in Africa, Asia, and Central and South America. Currently, he resides in North Carolina, where he is at work on his next novel. But today we'll be hearing from Overlord, a chilling and thought-provoking glimpse of a terrifying near future. Overlord explores the catastrophic consequences of climate change if it were to happen tomorrow. For ex-Miami police officer Madison Cervantes and her weary salvage crew, a burning oil rig in the polluted Gulf is another life or death assignment. Put out the fire before the Gulf itself ignites, when they end up on the wrong side of a big storm. Unable to escape the flames or the weather, they must beat back the apex predators lurking in the waters and hope that the weather clears before their ammo runs out. Eric, the rest is up to you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this passage begins with that same group of people. The apex predator that they're going to be up against is called a Mowgli. So this is from Overlord. They were in the thick of it, just at the edge of a bad storm, and the chopper banged around like a toy being abused by a very large child. But that's all they had anymore, bad storms. And all they did anymore was fly through them on the way to difficult jobs. The thrum of the chopper rotors was almost enough to put Madison to sleep, except she was so perpetually tired that even closing her eyes seemed irrelevant. And then the chopper would jolt and dance on the winds, and her hatred of flying would jolt her awake. They pulled her and her team off her crappy job in what was left of Houston for an oil rig fire that had restarted in the Gulf. All the rigs were abandoned now, and they were all spilling something toxic into the water. And even from the height of their chopper, she could see the rainbow discoloration of the gentle swells that meant petroleum and other heavy chemicals that spread as far as the eye could see. The water looked almost as bad as her crew smelled, an impressive aroma of human waste, soot, salt water, and pure grime from several days without showers. Rumor had it that Central Command was afraid they'd wake up and find the entire Gulf in flames that they could see from the Capitol in Cleveland, which was not particularly far-fetched because they could already smell the dirty water in Ohio and elsewhere along the new American coastline that included the places where the sea had connected to the Great Lakes. "What's the story with the storm?" Madison said into her headset, hoping the pilot, who was a real jerk named Barry, would respond. "We're supposed to have a window of 36 hours. That means I'm going to drop you and your crew and get a load of fuel and come back for you," the pilot said. "Come on, Barry. You know Central always lies about the weather. The window could be half of what they're saying." "Yeah, but the God's honest truth is I don't have enough fuel to make it all the way back to dry land fully loaded. If this one has any kind of cojones, you know the temporary pad we used in Houston is going to be underwater the minute the rain starts." "Any Mowgli sightings?" she asked Barry, the pilot. Central says no. "Oh, come on. That's a bunch of crap. There's probably Mowglis all over the place, and they probably sent us directly into the heart of a killer storm." Barry nodded and turned towards the front canopy. "And speaking of which, we seem to have arrived. Behold the oil rig Ocean Ranger 7, guys and girls." They all turned to stare at the oil rig, which looked like every inch was engulfed in flames. "Oh man, look at the water," Reaper said, pointing. There were white streaks moving methodically around the burning rig, white streaks that meant that large aquatic mammals, affectionately called Mowglis, that were fast enough and big enough to create wakes, were swimming around the rig, a behavior they only exhibited when they were hungry. "How many?" Madison asked. "I count 12, Gunnarsson, Madison's number 2, said. "Oh my God," Madison whispered. "There might have been twice that many lingering out of sight." She sighed. "Okay, there's a spot on the southwest side that is pretty clear, Barry. We're going to drop the sled there and rappel out, combat formation. Along with your salvage equipment, everybody goes in with a gun, with Reaper and Gunnarsson getting the high ground to provide overwatch. The minute we hit the rig, expect the critters to rush back up the leg closest to us, and we're going to spend the first part of the visit dealing with them. Then we see what's what with the fire." She looked at each one of her 4 people in the eye, making sure they had the play. The ammo for their high-tech rail guns would run out in an hour or 2 tops. She was carrying a Colt 45, and it might take a clip of that caliber to bring down a single animal. The other 2, Nightingale and Sensabaugh, had similar personal weapons, but Sense, as they called him, had an ancient but well-cared-for Barrett 50 caliber rifle and plenty of ammunition. Madison paused for a moment, looking at her exhausted crew. For the most part, she knew what they'd lost in the floods, knew the enormous void that neither propelled them nor held them back. Reaper, the angry giant black man, Knight, the smartest of the bunch, and at 5'7", almost the shortest. Gunner, closer to 6 feet with sandy hair and a hard body slowly going out of shape. She hadn't told them that much about herself because what had died in her was too fundamental to endure describing. She had been beautiful once, on the other side, about the same height as Knight with short blonde hair. As she was their leader, she felt some guilt that she hadn't told any of them about her death wish, or the fact that she'd lost so much that she considered these jobs just a more tiresome way to die. They were over the rig, and they rappelled out from Barry's chopper. They rappelled out into the wind and the periodic gusts of greasy white rain. Madison went first as the lead, and her boots thumped on the metal plates of the chopper landing pad, and she staggered under the load of her equipment pack in the wind. She immediately had trouble breathing and managed to put her rebreather over her face before Reaper's big black-clad frame dropped from the line next to her. Madison pointed to her mask, and Reaper understood immediately and began to affix his rebreather unit before he began to cough. Madison watched as the rest of her crew deployed, watching carefully to see that nobody ended in a bird drop, an uncontrolled descent from the twitching chopper that almost inevitably meant a broken limb, a death sentence in a deployment like this one. She was most worried about Sensabaugh, and although the man seemed capable enough, He was a little too capable in her eyes, and his background a little too shrouded in shrugs and monosyllabic answers that were not responsive. He was the new guy anyway, and every prison crew working the Gulf had a built-in superstition about new guys, even guys who were solid, and Sense had a muscular 6 feet with black wavy hair, was pretty darn solid. But Madison had spared Sense most of the hazing that new guys took because he seemed good with a gun, and you never knew when he might need another shooter. Like now. She relaxed a bit as Sense managed to drop from the chopper without breaking a leg. She nodded to Gunnarsson and Reaper, and they began making their way to whatever higher ground was available and not engulfed in flames. Reaper reached the bridge of the structure first, which was the structure that was technically a floating marine craft with a drill attached. There wasn't enough oil industry expertise or equipment left to either run the rigs or remove them, but the administration had been briefed about the potential for ecological disaster that the platforms represented. So this rig, like all the others, was still anchored firmly to the floor of the Gulf, and the controls were bridged with a black AI box designed to make sure the rigs more or less stayed in place and didn't strain the anchor. Reaper stepped out onto the metal balcony that surrounded the command bridge and said into the command network, "Reaper on point." Seconds later, Nightingale's drone began feeding imagery to the team in the corner window of his visor. "Team, this is Night," Nightingale said over the net. "The drone's video processor is going to pick up and highlight rapid movement or change of state within its visual field. It will ignore weather-related stuff, but any big flare-ups from the rig fire and any movement from the critters will alert the drone and get tracked." Just then, there was a flare to Reaper's right, and a big chunk of the drilling tower fell away. Reaper hit the button to begin charging the railgun as the wind picked up and the rain intensified, and he was glad he'd checked the seals on the railgun's power unit. He wiped his visor with a free hand and smiled, thinking that the bastards running the show were determined to work them to death. Survival, in his mind, was increasingly looking like drawing a jack to fill out a royal flush when the deck was rapidly running out of cards. Sensabaugh was scanning the parts of the rig engulfed in fire, and it didn't look good to him. Something was feeding the flames, and he suspected that the idiots who'd been trying to scavenge the rig had left a pump that was providing fuel, although he didn't think raw crude oil coming out of the well itself would qualify. "Madison," he said into the comms net, "I need Nightingale on me to check out something. Over." The radio crackled. That's a negative, Sense. I can't split the group until we see what the beasties do. You need to get back here to the chopper pad before they come for you." Sensabaugh was armed with his Barrett 50 caliber rifle, which was not a close-in anti-personnel weapon, and really should have been sent up with Reaper to provide some level of combat overwatch. But Madison didn't completely trust the weapon or his marksmanship with it, and he was always close to being the odd man out. Until Houston, where he'd killed someone with his pistol and saved Madison's life. And I'm almost done, by the way. "Negative, Madison," he said. "I'm going to see if I can get high enough to provide additional cover with the rifle," he said, and began climbing a route that didn't look too bad. Gunnarsson had decided to stay with Madison on the landing pad, and he too lit the power stack on his railgun and watched the display spin up. His spare ammunition, packs of depleted uranium shells that the gun electromagnetically accelerated to high speeds, was at his feet. He made sure that the ammo pack attached to the gun apparatus was full, then slung the pack on his back. He glanced at Madison and moved away from the pad itself, but only far enough away so that he could cover the likely approaches and Madison and Knight. "Reaper, can you see me?" he said into the net. "Yeah, Gunner, you can cover both approaches to the pad, but something coming from the west side is going to be on you before you know it. Sense, where are you at? Can you cover him?" Sensabaugh replied, "I'm on the rig tower itself, on one of the maintenance platforms. I'm going to keep the rifle ready to cover both of you on the pad when your weapons are recharging. You got that?" "You're going to need multiple hits to bring down even a smallish beastie," Gunner said. "I'm going to go trigger down while you guys are most vulnerable. If you stagger your shots so that you're not both in recharge mode at the same time, I figure we'll be okay." Gunnarsson looked up at the bridge balcony where Reaper was watching and shook his head. "Sense, You've never seen one of these things, have you? The howl of the wind swept Sensabaw's words away. Sense, Gunnar said, repeat, please. But even he felt the deck plates tremble underneath his feet. Madison chanced to look up at where Sense had deployed and was glad that he thought and acted on his instincts. Unlike our two rail gunners, the old Barrett had plenty of ammo, and if Sense could hit the broadside of a barn with it, he might save all of them. The wind picked up then, and the rain began pounding down in torrents. She saw the drone pick up a sustained flare from the rig fire, which blew something into the air behind her. Then she felt the deck plates bouncing from the impacts of something heavy moving fast, and she caught a flickering glimpse from the drone cam of several huge white shapes on the northeast side of the rig, bounding towards the corner just opposite her position. The drone refocused, and she could see more white shapes climbing out of the water, too many to count. Here they come, she shouted into her microphone, and she pulled her 45 from its holster as the chopper pad began to bounce from the impact of many heavy white shapes running hard towards them. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Eric. Your narration is just perfect for a thriller reading, so that was really quite engaging to listen to. And at this point, we have about 15 minutes for our audience Q&A. So if you have a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type that in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. And authors, if you have questions for each other, definitely feel free to throw those in the chat as well. But I have already received a couple questions. The first one is for all three of you. So this question is, what is or was the most gratifying thing about publishing this novel? Maybe Graham, do you want to start us off with this one?
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, I think the most gratifying thing about publishing this one was that it took me about 12 years to complete it. It started out as a response to Robbe-Grier's Jealousy, strange sort of little reportage type story. And it was then migrated into a screenplay and then went dormant for a number of years. And then I finally decided that I would read David Foster Wallace, which I was trying to avoid diligently, and then did it, and then thought, oh, there's the narrator. And then I was able to kind of put this Faulknerian Robbe-Grier screenplay mixed with David Foster Wallace. And then I wrote straight for 4 years or something. And finally, in something like 2018 or 19, I finally finished. So most gratifying thing was finally being done after 12 years. So
There's something good about that finality at the end, I think. Going to Elizabeth, what was the most gratifying thing about publishing your novel? Oh, it looks like you might still be muted, Elizabeth.
Okay, so I actually have been working on this for about 20 years and gave it up, put it aside, and then it started nagging at me. And going along doing household chores, I'd see little things that reminded me about it, and this voice saying, "Are you gonna do it? Are you gonna finish it? Or are you just gonna let it die?" And so finally, I learned about Atmosphere Press and how supportive they were with their authors, and decided to get serious about it and finish it. And so now I feel that I have something to leave behind. Not a monument or anything, no grand buildings or anything like that, but this I have at least to leave behind. And I had a long struggle with writing. Family didn't support me too much. They thought it was just um, a whim that had gotten a hold of me, and that I was taking it too seriously, but I did it away from them so that they weren't aware I was still working on it. And but that's it, is the fact that I saw it through and got it done, and it's a beautiful print. And as I say, everybody at Atmosphere was so supportive, and were not going to let me give up. So that was a long answer to a short question.
No worries. I think it's always great to hear an author's kind of thought process about that. But definitely what you were saying about leaving a legacy like that,
Right.
I mean, that's something I've pondered a lot too. So
That's the
totally,
word I was trying to think of, was legacy. Mhm.
yeah. Eric, maybe wrapping us up with this one, what was the most gratifying thing about publishing Overlord?
Going back to being a published author, I was first published a long time ago, 30 years ago, and had only written sporadically since, for the last 10 years or so. The last thing I had published was a short story in an anthology in 2017. So going back to full-length fiction and getting something out there has really inspired me to sort of go back to not only the writing, but some of the things I created in the past.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's so much to be unearthed by going back to those older works. So, love to hear I'm not alone in that one. I've got a question now that comes in for Graham. You've published 2 books before this one, and they seem like they're probably different from Henry's Chapel. So, how do you come up with your book ideas, or how do you know what genre that you want to write a story in?
I'm so glad I thought about that sort of question before this came on. I think most of my or these three books were inspired by reading other books. So Winter Park, which was published with Atmosphere Press, was inspired by Lynn Tillman's book, American Genius. I don't know if you folks have heard of Lynn Tillman, but she's a wonderful writer who writes in kind of negative dialectical forms of like, well, if this happens, if that, and it tears itself apart. And I think it's very funny. So Winter Park came from that, and then personal experience in Colorado. And then Henry's Chapel was Faulkner. I think I don't know how much Faulkner I mentioned before, but a heavy dose of Faulkner, then a dormant period, and then added with David Foster Wallace. So these two voices combined, I think. So the answer is reading. How do you come up with how do I come up with what I want to write about? Well, it's by reading and becoming seriously like jolted alive by something really cool, as in Lynn Tillman, Faulkner, David Foster Wallace. So that's my response.
Yeah, I mean, reading is the greatest tool available to a writer, I would say. So, this is a question that comes in for all 3 of you again from Jennifer. There is such a high degree of detail and explanation and environment description in your works. Which comes first, your imagination/narration of the scene, building to what comes next, or do you start with the plot and fill in the details later? Eric, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah, I mean, different writers have different styles, and some people are much more detailed about the environment and some much less. So I think it's a matter of style, and I think it's a matter of what the scene or what the plot point really is about. Um, so in a sort of climate change dystopian environment that I'm writing in, of course, it's a dark and stormy night all the time. But yeah, I think it really varies depending upon the writing style and what it is you want the atmosphere to portray, or how it helps you or hinders you in terms of the story and the characters.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of all plays together in that way. Elizabeth, what about you? Did you start with the imagination and narration, or did you start with the plot first?
Oh dear. Just ideas bombard my brain. I see images, I see people, I hear them talking. I see movies, I read books that I thought could have ended better in a better way or more fulfilling way, and so decided to do it my way. And um, so that's so I can't really say. I know there are some people that make outlines and they write down scenes and they connect them all. No, no, it just comes to me, and then I go back and have to make sure that it all makes sense. You know that chronologically and uh, true to life, how true to life, even if it's a fan, fanciful fictional story set in a fictional place, it needs to be um, it needs to sound like something that really could have happened, and so that and trying to avoid cliches and reading so many books. Um, um, you get annoyed by people using the same ideas over and over. I've been stuck for past 2 years reading World War II, and I still pick up books about that. That's the war that seemed to really divide history into what was past, and everything that's happened since World War II is after the war, and that war still has repercussions that we see around the world. People, countries throwing off um, colonizers and finding their own identity and their own culture, and people since I was born and grew up, little girl and everything. I know that there are some laggers that won't change, but I have seen such tremendous change in attitude in people towards people of different cultures and being more accepting, and that's good. There's still, lots of progress needs to be made, but I've seen a lot of change since I was growing up, since I was in grade school, high school. There's so many things. So I think I got I think I got way off the subject there, but anyway.
Well, it definitely ties in with, the writing in your book too. So, I think just Graham is left for this question. Are you starting with the imagination and narration or with the plot and then coming back to the details?
Yeah, I'll just tag on a little bit to what Elizabeth said. I kind of agree with her. I in fiction, unlike with an essay, so if the argument of an essay is like the plot, well, I will in such case, in the case of an essay, try to map it out. That's probably the wise thing to do to keep your paper under control. Um, but with fiction, no, not at all. I think it comes by an inspiration of a scene, either from another book or, as Elizabeth said, maybe from a film or just life, and then trying to imagine that scene in my own way to put my own stamp on it if I'm able to do so, to make it somehow original, somehow not the same as so many things I've read and seen. So for me, I really don't know where it's going. It's scene by scene, and then I'll let the scene develop, and then I'll right from the start, and then something else will occur, and sometimes that has to get scrapped. But it's organic in that sense for me. So
Yeah, so I'm hearing a lot from all three of you, just kind of putting it together as it goes along. Um, We do have one other question. This came in for Eric. This person says, how did you research for your book, since it seems to be based in what we know about the future of climate change? Or maybe the not so distant future, I should say.
So I did a lot of research about climate, and I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's written about climate, so it's pretty easy to do climate change research. But I actually needed something more dramatic than what people are predicting. So I invented some additional aspects of climate change that have nothing to do with what's actually happening now. It's not a prediction of what anything that's going to happen, but I need something that would produce a more dramatic and quicker shift of, for the U.S. in terms of both coasts being underwater, et cetera. And I needed something that would make that happen much faster than people are suspecting. The coast will be inundated from melting ice caps and things like that. So I did some research, and I created some phony science as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of, I guess, anxiety around it and just wondering where that all comes from. So thank you for sharing that. All right, so at this point, I just want to say thank you to the three authors here with us, sharing with us today. So thank you to Graham, Elizabeth, and Eric, just for being generous with your books, but also your time and your thoughts today. And thank you to everyone in the audience for being here with us to celebrate these incredible authors. I'm going to drop the links to purchase their books one more time in the chat, because it's always so great if you can support our authors. And please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com. And there you can browse our new and forthcoming releases. You can sign up for our email newsletter. And of course, you can submit a book manuscript there. You can submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com as well. And just let us know that you attended today's event. So we'll look forward to hearing from you. But other than that, that's it. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Same to you. Same to you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for everybody who listened in.